everyone. Vikings Guy here. My next guest on the podcast is somebody who really needs no introduction if you're a Vikings fan, Mr. Alan Roach. Alan Roach, of course, is the public address announcer at our U.S. Bank Stadium. But Alan Roach also is the public address announcer for the Colorado Avalanche, the Colorado Rapids, including, of course, the Vikings. He's also the voice of NFL events worldwide. You've heard him at Super Bowls, you've heard him at Pro Bowls, you've heard him at Major League Baseball events. He also is the voice of the public address on the Madden series of football. So without further ado, I want to introduce Mr. Alan Roach. Skol. Hey everyone, this is Vikings Guy. Thanks for joining. I'm here with the legendary Alan Roach. And for anybody who doesn't know who Alan is, it's a long list of accomplishments, but I'm going to let him say hi to you, and you'll know exactly who he is. Go ahead.
Legendary could just mean old, too, you know. Hello.
Hi there. Yeah, so Alan, thanks again for coming on. This is a dream come true for me, and for Viking fans, of course too. I mean, when you walk up to U.S. Bank Stadium, we had mentioned this before we started recording. You walk up to U.S. Bank Stadium, and what do people hear when they walk up?
You know, I saw a security guy outside one of the games, one of the last 3 in a row home games.
Yeah.
It was an earlier game because I remember they were there at like 7 in the morning and I was getting there for a meeting. And they had already started the welcome to U.S. Bank Stadium. And it was already outside the stadium. And the security guards were complaining that it was on already that early in the morning. You know, they play that outside for, you know, probably 3.5 hours straight. Those poor guys have to listen to that over and over and over. And on this particular day, they had to listen for 5 hours.
Yeah, that's so funny. You know, it's interesting to me. One of the things you mentioned in one of your interviews with NFL Network or the NFL Films was that you don't like hearing your own voice. Like you sort of would rather not hear it. Explain that. I mean, explain because like I think I'm sort of the same way. When I hear my voice on different things, I'm like, oh man, that was pitchy or this was weird or I say something this way. Explain why you feel that way.
I would guess it's pretty similar for kind of anyone in the industry that uses your voice, whether it's radio or TV or singers, whatever it might be. I just never have. I mean, while I'm doing for instance, when I'm doing a commercial and I'm trying to get a certain feel in a commercial, whether it's a nice, comfortable feel or whether it's a hard-hitting feel, you know, I work very hard during the time of recording the commercial and maybe record the same line 6, 8, or 10 times to get it just perfect. Right. And then I send it off and then I hear it back to me on the radio or on the TV and I'm like, oh, I didn't do a very good job of that.
Well,
so I think it just kind of comes with the territory. And it's been that way forever.
And one of my favorite commercials, it's weird, it's that Minnesota Lottery one where you say Cloquet. And I'm just like, he hammers Cloquet perfectly. If I was the mayor of Cloquet, I would just be like snipping that and replaying that over and over and over.
Well, I love that. And thank you very much. I've heard that commercial many times listening to Vikings broadcasts on the radio. And same thing. Yeah. My apologies. Same thing. I hear that. It's like, I could have done so much better. Yeah. But you for the compliment.
No, that was great. You know, one of the things I wanted to mention is, like I said, I've been at every home game minus COVID. Let me be clear. I missed one home game in the last 9 seasons that wasn't COVID. And that was that little thing they did in 2022 against Indianapolis. Might remember that game. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the one I missed. I know. And I remember thinking they could clinch playoffs today, but you know what? So what? It's going to be it's a non-conference game. Who cares, right? And down 33-0, I call up my people at the stadium. I go, ha, you know, see, they're going to clinch in another week. And by the end of the game, of course, it was different. But one of the things in getting to that, when you announce games there, one of the things I really like from the very beginning is when you're doing announcements or whatever, you say our Minnesota Vikings. You don't say your Minnesota Vikings. Is that something that you've always done regardless where you've been, or how come you say our and not your?
It's funny that you noticed that little intricacy.
Yeah.
No, I've never done it anywhere other than the Minnesota Vikings. And I've always said your. I've gone back to 1993 when I got my first kind of major league gig in Major League Baseball. It
Yeah.
was your Colorado Rock. Then it was your Colorado Avalanche. Then it was your Denver Broncos. And
Yeah.
it had been your all of those for all 25 years of my doing all of those jobs.
Yeah.
Well, then I got the Vikings job. And in the first year, that's just the way it's written. That's the way script writers write it for the PA guy. And your Minnesota Vikings. And
Yeah.
it was like maybe in the middle of that first year or in the second year that I was like, you know what? These aren't your Minnesota Vikings because I'm part of your.
Yeah.
So include me in your, that becomes our. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, just a little something I do. And it was more of a personal thing than anything else, but I'm glad you noticed.
Yeah, well, it's like I said, it's some of these voiceover things or like public address announcing. I pay attention to a lot of that stuff because there's different levels of talent, and you can't make up what your voice is, but the way you handle the job. I listened to like the Super Bowls, and I was over in London for the London Viking game this year, and it's a point of pride for me to hear you there, to hear you doing Super Bowls. And for my younger listeners, you do the Madden football game too, correct?
I do.
Yeah. And so, do you have children?
I do.
Yeah. And
They're
so,
both.
what do your children say about that?
Oh, they don't even know. They're 26 and 22, and they grew up in my working 175 sporting events a year.
Yeah.
So by the time they were 7 years old, they had gone to so many playoff games and championship games and season openers and
Yeah.
night games. And, that it became for them, it's like, well, it's not that special.
Right.
And it kind of just points to kind of along what you were saying, all those amazing events that I get to announce really on an annual basis. I mean, there's events, that people would dream of only being at one of the events that I get to go to in a year,
Yeah.
and I get to go to 6 or 8 of those in a year, and I've done it now for 20 or 25 years.
Sure.
Numbers are mind-boggling, and it's incredibly humbling, and I never forget it ever when I sit down in a chair, whether it's at a Super Bowl or
Yeah.
at a Viking game or at a Colorado Rapids game. How great it is that I have the ability to do what I do and call it my job.
Right. When I think in kind of researching for this interview, one of the things that was interesting to me is when I was a kid, and it was probably 93, 94, I would fall asleep listening to AM radio.
I would too.
And right, but on AM radio, it was 850 KOA that we
Ah,
could get in Minnesota at night. If you were at night at like in the evening, you could catch Colorado radio in Minnesota. And I remember Rockies games, and it was so funny because when I saw it at KOA, I thought, oh my gosh, how funny is that I would actually sit there and listen to it at night, and it would come in clear as a bell in the middle of the night in over by Fairmont, Minnesota. So
yeah, it has and is still that way. I think it's one of the most powerful AM
yeah,
stations in the country. I don't remember listening to that because it was so close to WCCO.
yeah,
WCCO was 830 and KOA was 850. I
yeah,
remember listening to KOA on a family road trip when we drove from Minnesota to California, and my parents listened to KOA for 75% of that trip.
yeah,
The stations I listened to growing up in Slayton, Minnesota, and laying with my little transistor radio that was this big, and I'd set it by my pillow.
right.
I listened to KAAY in Little Rock, Arkansas, and WLS in Chicago.
How funny. Yeah. I did the same thing with Chicago too. What's interesting is they didn't have all this internet radio, the streaming stuff, of course. And so it was finding those different radio stations. It would come in really clear from different parts of all over the United States. So it's kind of interesting. I just wanted to mention that. One of the things I saw on the NFL Films piece that you did was uh, about, how do I want to say this? You're doing Super Bowl games. How did you end up going from you were an announcer for the Broncos for how many years?
16.
16. And so how did the transition happen from you're doing NFL games to when, like the first Super Bowl. How did that happen? Did they approach you? How did that all come about, doing your first Super Bowl?
Well, you have that backwards because I didn't transition
So
from the
okay.
Broncos to the Super Bowls. I actually transitioned from the Super Bowl to the Broncos.
Okay, very good. I guess I didn't know that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Um, and when I say 16 years, let me explain. In 2000, I took the job with KOA Radio, and I became the sports guy on KOA.
Hmm.
And along with that job came pregame show host for the Broncos, sideline reporter during the games for the Denver Broncos, post-game locker room interview guy
Yeah.
after the games. And so from 2000 to 2006, that's what I did. And the Denver Broncos had a PA man named Alan Cass, who had done it for about 35 years, a true legend. Unfortunately, he's now since passed away, but he was the voice of the Denver Broncos pretty much from their inception all the way
Sure.
up until 2000. And I would do the starting lineups at the beginning of the game from down on the field because I was a sideline reporter. I was already down there with a microphone. I
Yeah.
would do the starting lineups. I would do the check presentations in pregame. I would do welcome to halftime. I would do here comes the horse that runs out. Well, I can't remember the name. Thunder. Here comes
Yeah.
Thunder. So I didn't do the actual PA of the games, but I was just doing those kind of announcements
Right.
during outs and breaks and pregame. And during somewhere around 2004, I got a call from University of Colorado, and they play a game every year. Colorado University versus CSU, Colorado State University. They call it the Rocky Mountain Showdown. And the Rocky Mountain Showdown in 2004, instead of being played at the individual schools, was going to be played at Mile High Stadium. And it was Mile High Stadium, I believe, at that point.
Right.
And so they asked me if I do PA for those games. Well, I'd never done a football game before, but I was like, sure, I'll do it. So I did that 3 years in a row.
Yeah.
Maybe 2003, 2004, 2005. During that time, I was the announcer for the NHL All-Star game.
Right.
I had done an All-Star game with the Avalanche, and then I traveled around to the NHL. Well, during the NHL lockout in 2004, my boss at the NHL took a new job. Instead of being the vice president of special events for the NHL, he became the vice president of special events for the NFL. And he called me in 2005 and said, I have good news and I have bad news. You're no longer the voice of the NHL All-Star game. You're now the voice of the Super Bowl.
Well, that's too bad.
Football games. I had announced 3 college football games prior to my announcing the Denver Broncos, or prior to announcing Super Bowl 40 between the Steelers and the Seahawks in Detroit in February of 2006. And then just kind of by way of timing, Alan Cass, who I told you about with the Broncos, he'd become kind of ill and he missed the next year or year and a half. And I started in with the Broncos right after that.
Yeah. You know, one of the interesting things I saw too is in 2016, the Broncos were in the Super Bowl. And they said, well, unfortunately, you're part of the home field advantage. And so you couldn't do that Super Bowl. Explain that a little bit, because I have another question after that. But explain, how did that come about where they said, you know what, you're, because I understand it. When I walk into US Bank Stadium and I hear those announcements, I've been there 9 seasons. I just get the goosebumps, right? I mean, it's legitimately, when you come in there, I know you're a very humble guy, but I have people all the time saying that announcer, like, wow. And I'm like, listen, this is part of Showtime. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Showtime is the best, and I'm just a small part of that. And it is award-winning, and I don't say that lightly or flippantly. It is the best sports entertainment atmosphere
Love it.
in the world, and has been awarded as such many, many times, multiple times per year over the last 6 to 10 years since the stadium opened. I know what your next question is going to be about the Broncos and the Super Bowl and not doing it. And I've already answered that question, I think, 2 or 3 different times on interviews this year. When
Yeah.
you asked me before we started, is there anything you don't like to talk about? This is the thing I don't like to talk about. I will. Um, yeah, when the Denver Broncos made the Super Bowl in 20, I think it was 2014. No, the first day, it was earlier than that. Or was it not? No, maybe it wasn't. It was
Well, they
20.
played in one in New York.
Well, they played in New York. I
Yeah.
was still doing sideline reporting for KOA radio,
Hmm.
but I was also the PA announcer for the Broncos at the home games.
Hmm.
And when we beat the Patriots in the AFC Championship game in Denver, I get a call immediately after from my boss at the NFL that said, "Sorry, but you're not going to be allowed to announce the Super Bowl. It's competitive advantage or whatever." The next year, and that was the first year of Peyton Manning.
Yeah.
The next year, the Broncos were 11-1. And I got a call from the NFL and they said, "Hey, Broncos are 11-1. Last year we replaced you 13 days before the Super Bowl. That was a very difficult thing. You have to record stuff beforehand, you have to get ready beforehand, you have to make preparations. We're not going to wait until 13 days. Broncos are 11-1 with Peyton Manning. They're going to go to the Super Bowl again, so you're not doing the Super Bowl this year either." Well, Broncos got beat in the playoffs this year, and I didn't do that Super Bowl. That was the Arizona Super Bowl with the
Yeah.
Patriots interception at the 1 yard line. So then the next year they're like, "Well, you can come back as long as the Broncos don't go." Then of course the Broncos ended up going to the Super Bowl. So I missed Super Bowls 48, 49, and 50 as far as a PA announcer. And I kind of wondered if I would ever be invited back because now I've lost my chair for 3 years in a row. Will I get invited back? Thankfully, I was. In
Yeah.
2018, February of 2018, when the Vikings were one game away from playing in the Super Bowl at US Bank Stadium, I was told by the NFL at that time that they have cleared that. And I had proven with my performance over the years that I am a trusted and professional announcer that can announce any team, anywhere, at any time, for any reason. And there should be no reason to tie me to one team or another. I announce different teams in different
Right.
sports all over the world. You are the Super Bowl announcer. And that was understood that no matter who played in the game, I would be the Super Bowl announcer.
Yeah.
Well, the Vikings didn't get there to test that theory. And now, yes, we're into 6 weeks of, well, what's going to happen now?
Yeah.
I don't know. I certainly would never put anything. I want the Vikings to make the Super Bowl with 100% of my being.
Yeah.
If that means I can't announce the game, so be it.
Yeah.
I will be crushed. I will be unhappy. But the fact that the Vikings will go to the Super Bowl would be a dream come true.
Yeah.
Again, for the 5th time in my lifetime.
Yeah. You know, it was, I'm sorry to put you on the spot with that, but when I was looking through the stuff for the interview, I'm like, yeah, I'm wondering how that works, because I get the competitive advantage part of it. So who replaced you on those Super Bowls? Was it just one person?
Scott Graham did
Oh,
all
he's
three of
great. He's great
Scott
too.
Westwood won.
Yeah, I love his voice too. I'm a voice guy. I mean, you're the same way. When I hear a voice, I'm like, Scott Graham is great, and Scott Graham could basically do anything too. I mean, if you, not that I want you to get replaced, but if you were going to get replaced, I'm sure you look at who replaces you and said, well,
Yeah, Scott has done. He's done play-by-play. He's done color analysis and is a studio host for NFL on Westwood One for
yeah, forever.
20 more.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
and he does USAA commercials all the time. And yeah, he's a fantastic voice, and I can call him a friend and a good guy.
yeah.
Certainly, there was no animosity. It wasn't his fault that they allowed him to do it instead of me.
Yeah. Well, what's he supposed to do? The
Yeah.
biggest game in the world in that year, I'm just, listen, I love Alan. I can't do that to him, right? I mean, it's not about that. It's not about
Well,
that. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So this year, speaking of this year, the Vikings, because I do want to get some Vikings slant in on it too. The Vikings are 12-2. They played a lot better at home this year. Yeah, I guess they say we're right in the sweet spot for that home field advantage. I know Viking fans, especially ones that have been around for the Super Bowl losses, are very reticent about speaking of future success. Now, I guess from my perspective, I've tried to be this year a more positive vibes person where, hey, listen, why not the Vikings? None of these players were on the field in 76 or 77, right? None of them suffered those indignities. None of them were there in 98. Let me ask you a question. Why, if the Vikings don't make it this year, what would be a reason? I'm going to ask you two parts. If they don't make it, why? If they do make it, why? It could be the same thing.
Well, no, I don't think it's the same thing, and it's not any. I don't have any grandiose answer. If they don't make it, it's because they failed to play to their ability, to the
Yeah.
level of what they're capable of. The
Yeah.
Vikings are fully capable of beating any team in the playoff picture on any Sunday in any stadium. End of story. But you can say that about the Eagles. You can say that about the
Right.
Chiefs. You can say that about the Bills. I'm not sure you can say it about the Lions anymore. They are devastated by injuries.
Yeah.
But those top teams, one of those teams is going to play their best football at the most important moments. And that team's going to go on to the Super Bowl and win it.
Yeah.
The team that doesn't, isn't.
Right.
The team that fails in a critical moment is not going to make it. So that would be the reason why the Vikings wouldn't make it. If they do make it to the Super Bowl, I think you have to look directly at the top of the organization, and that begins with the owners.
Yeah.
What the owners have done for the Vikings in the last 10 years with building the facility in Egan,
Yeah.
that when free agent players come and look at it, they say, I want to play here.
For sure.
They hired Kevin O'Connell 3 years ago, and every player in the NFL looks at what's going on and talks to Viking players and says, I want to play there.
Yeah.
And then Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, who has picked up free agent players that weren't at the top of anyone's list except ours.
Correct.
And they're now the top players on our defense.
Right.
The Vikings organization and the culture that they have cultivated and continue to develop is the reason why this team will go to the Super Bowl, because they are incredibly well coached. They have unbelievable talent,
Right.
and they all want to play together because of the culture of the organization.
Right. Yeah, what a great answer. When you're around the game day experience there at the stadium and you meet people in customer service, guest experience, Andrew Miller, who is as impressive as an NFL executive as I've ever met. He's a sharp guy. He's very down to earth. I just think the leadership is so incredible. You remember the Winter Park days, the multiple ownership days, where that place out there in Eden Prairie was, it was third world in a lot of ways. Wilfs purchased the team. They lay out some rules. That whole Love Boat thing where they had to sort of, that was a tough thing for new owners to have to come in and kind of clean that situation up and to see where they're at now. I piggyback on that perfectly. I tell people say, when will the Vikings win a Super Bowl? And I said a year ago, I said within 3 years. You're exactly right when it comes to that training facility. Have you spent much time out at TCO?
I have. I actually stay
Yeah.
there every week when I come in. I live in Denver, so I fly
Yeah.
in and I stay at the Omni there at the facility, and I've toured the facility several
Yeah.
times, and sometimes just go walk around.
Yeah.
It is state of the art, first class, and any teams that have built a facility in the last 5 years have come to Minnesota during the construction or planning process to say,
Yeah.
okay, we want to do that, we want to do that, we want to do that, and we want to do that.
Right. Yeah. I've been in there 6, 7 times, and I have to be honest, I've been lost 3 or 4 times. The last time I was in there for it was a Q&A on improvement for the staff at US Bank Stadium, and I'm in there and I'm talking to the caterer because they're going to throw some food away. I'm like, I'll take the food with me. I got 5 kids, man. I'll take whatever. And they don't serve garbage there, right? So I'm loading
Yeah.
up food, but JP Paul and a number of people with the Vikings just leave. And so here I am with these bags, these to-go bags at TCO Performance Center, like some sort of vagrant, and I'm lost. I'm wandered around the place, And there's nobody to be found in the place that you've been in there. The place is so big that you could
Yeah,
get lost and spend 30 minutes trying to get back to the place you started and
yeah.
be nowhere near the place you wanted to go. And they had a good laugh when I come down tired now because I've walked around the place and holding these bags, these to-go bags. It was a ridiculous experience, but yeah, it's a really crazy place. And who is your favorite Viking player right now?
Uh I don't know that I can answer that question. I mean, I think maybe I have a different favorite going into every game, thinking who I feel like has to have a big day,
Yeah,
whether it's Jonathan Grenard or Andrew Van Ginkel or Harry, or whether it's JJ, or whether it's TJ Hawkinson, or even Sam Darnold.
yeah,
You know, it's impossible for me to pick a favorite right now, because it changes
yeah,
maybe from day to day or even quarter to quarter.
right.
My favorite player of all time is Alan Page.
Yeah,
Um, I think the classiest and most distinguished and accomplished football player, not only in Viking history, but to a great deal in NFL history.
yeah. I mean, his accomplishments are, and the thing that tarnishes the whole thing is, of course, no Super Bowls, right? I mean, no Super Bowl wins, and that's why I feel bad for a guy like Jim Marshall, who, I everything about him screams Hall of Fame. And I think if Bud Grant would have lived a little longer, he would have stayed final for that push to get Marshall in the Hall of Fame because he's certainly a guy I think deserves it. Um, who is the name that you have most fun announcing? Like when you get out there and you're ripping off the name. I have my favorite, but I'm not going to say ahead of time. Who, when you get out there and you let it rip, or you like, I nailed that one?
In football, there's not kind of the same. I mean, there is
Yeah,
with some names, like last week, who was the name Amin Agbangbamiga. Amin Agbangbamiga
yeah,
was a fun name to say, and it's terrifying to look at it and start saying it and go, oh, I hope this comes out right. Agbangbamiga. Yep, that
yeah,
was it. Nailed it.
yeah.
In hockey, you get a lot of that, and some in baseball too.
Right.
And certainly in like World Cup soccer, there's names that are really difficult. But as far as just having fun, with what I'm saying, just being able after a 34-yard catch to say Justin Jefferson as the crowd is going crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just amazing. It can't be beat.
I think I've heard you say Jets too. Have you said
Uh,
Jets?
yeah, I've thrown in a Jets here and there. I don't know that I say it during the actual play-by-play of what happened,
Yeah.
but I have said it a couple of times, like when I do a scoring summary.
Yep.
That Viking scoring drive capped by a 32-yard touchdown catch by Jets.
I sound like a terrible stalker, don't I? I sound
I,
terrible. You're just like, how did you notice that? Because I
I,
just sit there all day like this, and I know I sound. I just want to apologize in advance. I honestly am not stalking you. I just am just
I
such a
have the
huge
greatest
fan.
job in the world. I understand why people want to ask me questions about my job because seriously, I have the
Yeah.
greatest job in the world. I wish it paid millions and millions of dollars and I had, 15 collector cars and mansions and houses all over
Yeah.
the world. I don't. PA announcers don't make that much money. We
Right.
don't make what radio announcers make. To some degree, we're part-time employees.
Sure.
In fact, we are part-time employees. So I
Yeah.
get paid only when there's games, and there's only 10 games a year or 10 plus whatever playoff games there are.
Right.
So, it's really hard to make a living as a public address announcer. I've been so fortunate to been able to do that for the last 10 or 12 years, and it's a dream for me. So
Right.
when people are curious and want to ask me questions, I'm happy to answer.
Yeah, and I didn't want to skip over it. I work sometimes in the operations center, which is not far from where you work, and they brought in those call sheets where it has the names of all the players and how to pronounce them. And I'm always the first time I ever saw one of those was like 4 years ago. I go, this is great because if you're coming into a game and the names are difficult to pronounce or you're not exactly sure how, the NFL does a nice job of taking some of that work out of there for you so that you don't have to. I mean, explain the preparation when you come into that for a week. What do you have to do in a week to try and get ready for that game? I mean, you have the call sheet, but what is your normal steps to get ready for that week?
That's really all there is. And I've said it many times when I'm asked that question. What is my preparation takes an hour.
Yeah.
Um, if you go on to my Twitter X page at Mile High Roach, um, almost every event I go to before the event starts, I take a picture of my workspace with the field in the background. And so you'll be able to see what I make for the Vikings. I make two sheets that
Yep.
have Vikings defense, opponent defense, numerical order, and two sheets that are Viking offense and opponent offense broken up into quarterbacks, receivers, running backs. And so that's really the only preparation that I have to do,
Yeah.
physical preparation. And then before the game, within, 2 hours before the game, I will just go seek out the media relations director for the visiting team. He'll be in the press box one floor below where I sit at US Bank. I go
Mhm.
down there and I just spend 5 minutes. I take that flip card and it has the pronunciations, and I just say, am I doing these pronunciations right? I have a question on this guy and a question on that guy. Anything else?
Yeah.
Any other names that anybody particularly gets wrong or struggles with? Thank you. 5 minute conversation and we're done.
Yeah.
I'm ready.
So before a game, and maybe this is outside of what you do, when they decide to announce the defense or the offense, who directs that to you? Like this week, we're going to introduce the offensive starters. How do you find who decides that, or how does that come about?
I would guess to some degree the team might decide that. I mean, it
Yeah.
could even be the head coach that decides that. But I
Yeah.
don't know. Maybe it's our entertainment
Yeah.
department that decides that. I don't know. I'm sure it's a collaboration to some degree, and it maybe changes here and there. For the most part, it kind of goes every other offense one week, defense the other. But there's been times where
Yeah.
where that's been flipped around too. I don't know who makes the decision, and when I get there on game day, there's a script for me, and it
Yeah.
says, "Here's the guys that we're announcing, and here's the order that we're announcing them in."
Yeah. So it's just show up and do your work.
Yep.
Yeah. That's
I always
interesting.
tell my job is to read. People will say, "Hey, can you say this?" Well, can you write it down for me? That's usually what I do. You write it down, and I say it. That's my job.
Well, it's interesting because my last name is Jabot. It's John Jabot, and nobody, even when I played sports in high school, nobody ever got it right. So before I let you go, would you be willing to say my name in a way that you're announcing it? I this is a fan guy thing, and if you don't want to, it's cool. But I told my kids, I go, I got to see if he can say John Jabot because I mean it would honestly just make my whole life. So
So, and the name of your podcast is Vikings Guy.
it's Vikes Day One, the Vikes Day One podcast. Yep.
Vikes Day One.
Yep.
And now, starting for Vikes Day One, please welcome John Jimbo!
I don't even have words, but thank you. That is so awesome.
Every
This
time
is,
you play that, you owe me $100.
well, just put that on my bill, right? Yeah. No, this is great. I mean, honestly, you're such a humble fellow too, which I love. I mean, I told someone this morning, I said, I meet a lot of I've met Chad Greenway. I've had Adam Rank from NFL Network on. And I said, what I appreciate the people that work around the NFL is just the professionalism. Like they're serious, there's fun there, but the NFL is serious business. If you were to describe your work in the NFL and the way that the NFL as a corporation is run, how I feel like it's serious business. It's very much organized and it's just such a well-run business. Describe your experience with the NFL and how that's gone and I'm just interested in your opinion on that because when I come to the stadium, I'm so impressed by just the way they handle things. And you're right about Showtime. Every year, it's like they amp it up, and I don't think it can get any better. And they just nail it. They just nail it. I mean, yeah. Anyways, I'm not going to step on you. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, it's, again, it's just what you said, but kind of exponentially so. It begins with the people that they hire.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, people want to work for the NFL. People that have worked in football, maybe at some other teams around the league or maybe worked at other sports leagues. When the NFL calls and says, "Hey, are you interested in this?" You listen
Yeah.
because of, just what the shield means in the
Yeah.
United States of America and now really across the world.
Right.
Um, and so it starts with the people that they hire, and then from there it goes to the management and the leadership that after hiring someone, they allow them to do their job.
Yeah.
And it's a collaboration between people that have boots on the ground putting together, in the area that I'm familiar with, the game entertainment process, and then having to tell that to people who are in management and leadership who don't really understand the game entertainment process, but instead of saying, well, I don't think you should do that, and I don't think you should do that,
Right.
they allow people to do their job and to be good at what they're good at.
Right.
Uh, so, yeah, the NFL is an amazing organization. Obviously, it's, ridiculously financially successful and
Yeah.
constantly growing, and now growing their product across the world.
Right.
Um, yeah, I'm sure there's fans of anything that hate a corporate structure or this gigantic
Yeah.
mega organization, but that's what the NFL is, but they're very successful at it, and they don't constantly throw it in employees' faces
Right.
anyway.
Yeah, and I'll wrap up here. I thank you so much for what you've given me today. This is honestly the interview of a lifetime for me, and I just love it, Alan. Thank you. One of the things we talked about TCO and the difference of the Vikings from where they came as more of a hometown, small run organization, training camp in Mankato. Have as a kid going to training camp, drinking beer in the parking lot with Carl Eller at training camp with my dad was one of our favorite moments. My dad goes, "That's Carl Eller, and he's got beer." And Carl says, "Hey, what's your name, Dick? Here, have a beer." To more of the corporate environment. And what I tell fans of the Vikings on my podcast and everywhere I go, I say, there is a trade off where you had that more hometown feel in Mankato, but I said, do you want to win? Because the competitive advantage that Eakin gives us is going to be felt, and it won't be felt like this. It'll be felt over time, and it seems like you agree with that too.
Yeah, you can complain and moan and gripe all you want about how there's not a single NFL player on the planet that should be given a $50 million a year contract. That's ridiculous. We
Right.
should be paying our teachers $50 million a year. I don't disagree with those sentiments, but reality is reality, and this is the way it is. So
Yeah.
don't blame the players for this being such a gigantic money machine. That's
Right.
just the way it is. They're part of that machine. They don't make the rules. And if you were part of that machine or fortunate enough to be part of that machine, I'm guessing you wouldn't say, no, I don't want the money. And
Right.
credit to players, many of them do so many things. And the NFL obviously is behind that as well with the Walter Payton NFL Man of the Year and all of the
Right.
things the players do on Tuesdays. Imagine what their schedule is like and what their body feels like after getting in 17
Right.
car accidents on a Sunday afternoon. Monday, they get the
Yep.
day to watch film, and then Tuesday is their day off. And so many of those 60 players on the Vikings are out in the community every Tuesday
Yeah.
without TV cameras, without reporters, doing things for children, for people in need, and giving back some of
Yeah.
that millions of dollars that people gripe about. So,
Yeah.
yeah, you have to spend the money in order to compete, and the Vikings ownership has understood that and embraced that, and right now they're trying to turn that into a tremendous success story.
Right. You're amen to that. And having worked at the stadium a long time, I've been fortunate enough to meet the Wilfs on a number of occasions, and I've even met Roger Goodell on a number of occasions. And I try not to be starstruck because I've been around a lot of people. Clearly, it happens. But Roger Goodell is one of the most down to earth people I think I've ever met in a position that he's in. I mean, he runs this giant, one of the biggest corporations in the world. And if you meet him, I'm assuming you've met him before, probably a number of times. He just seems like a regular dude. I mean, what's your impression on him?
the NFL exists because of fans.
Yeah.
Roger Goodell is the head of the NFL. So Roger Goodell's number one job should be to endear himself and his product to the fans.
Yeah.
And there's never been anyone better in the position that he's in to do that.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for that. So I'll put you one more spot, and I've been promising to let you go for a couple minutes. Last three games: Seattle, Green Bay, Detroit. Percent chance that they'll win all three.
I'm not allowed to bet being a member of the NFL, so I don't know what percentages and odds are. I think the Vikings will win all three.
Yeah.
I think, again, going back to all of those things we talked about at the beginning with the culture and the way they're playing and how they play for each other.
Right.
I'm not so sure they won't be favored in all three. They're favored by almost a touchdown in Seattle. If they win there, they're going to be favored against Green Bay at home.
Yeah.
And if they win those two games, I think Detroit will have already lost at least one by that point. I think they'll be favored going into Detroit because of all the challenges that Detroit has. Right. Favored doesn't mean anything, but it means that people that pay attention to that sort of thing are giving credence and saying this team is good enough to win,
right,
and should win, and that's the way I feel.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And one of my favorite, I was at the stadium, they had an event, and that's one of the things the Vikings do too, as they had an event for the staff, and I won a Kevin O'Connell signed football. And I'll tell you what, I've been around the Vikings a long time. I don't think I've liked to coach, other than Bud Grant, I don't think I've liked to coach more than Kevin O'Connell. He is just such a steady man, and he just, the way he resonates just with the public and with the media and with his players, I agree with you. I feel like there's something special about this team, and I know I've told myself a little bit of that before. I really feel there's something special about this specific team and the way they play and the way they talk. And I think like a guy like Aaron Jones, locker room guy. I mean, what that does for this team, in my opinion, it changes things. Not just how he runs, but the way he handles that offensive locker room, the steadiness of it.
I'm 58 years old. I don't envision myself letting go of the Vikings PA announcer job until they pry the microphone out of my hands and kick me out the door and lock it behind me.
Yeah.
I think Kevin O'Connell will outlast me with the Vikings organization. He'll be here longer than I will. And I hope that for the fans and for the organization, because he is top notch.
Well, listen, we agree on a lot of different things. I want to thank you again for coming on. If you ever decide a week it's not for you, you give me a call. I'll fill in. Anytime you need me to fill in, I'm already at the stadium. And I'm there like 4 hours early. So, if you get in a tight spot, I just want you to know I'm there for you. Just want you to know that.
Well, get in line. I have about 6,000 other people on the list, but we'll get you somewhere near the middle.
Well, listen, I'm completely unqualified. I can talk. That's about the only thing that gets me close. So thank you again so much. Merry Christmas to you and your family. And I guess we'll probably we'll be in the same building here in a couple weeks, and we'll take it to the Packers and put them to sleep.
Very good. Merry Christmas, John. Happy New Year. Skol, Vikings!
I love that. Skol. Thank you.